I passed out immediately after the accident. My sister left me alone at the hospital and disappeared. 10 days later, she came back and asked the nurse, "Is my younger sister still here?" The nurse replied with one sentence that left my sister frozen in shock. "My name is Naya, and at 29 years old, I never expected my own sister to leave me for dead, just to steal my house." Before I tell you how I destroyed her life with a single envelope, hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save yourself. The automatic doors of Chicago Memorial Hospital slid open with a soft whoosh, admitting a woman who looked like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine rather than a tragedy. My sister Bianca walked into the sterile lobby wearing oversized sunglasses that covered half her face. She was clutching a bright orange Hermes bag that I knew for a fact was a high-quality fake she bought downtown. In her other hand, she held her phone up high, live streaming to her 50,000 followers. "Guys, I am just walking into the hospital now," she whispered to her phone screen, her voice trembling with a sadness that was entirely manufactured. "Please keep praying for my little sister Nia. The doctor said it is bad. I do not know if I am strong enough for this." She paused to read the comments popping up on her screen. "Thank you for the stars, Becky. You are so sweet. Yes, I will try to stay strong for her." Walking a few steps behind her was her husband Chad. My brother-in-law looked less like a grieving relative and more like a man annoyed that his lunch break had been interrupted. He was checking his watch and adjusting the collar of his suit jacket. He looked around the lobby with a sneer, as if the smell of antiseptic and the sight of sick people were personally offending him. They marched straight up to the main reception desk. Behind the high counter sat head nurse Higgins. Mrs. Higgins was a woman in her 60s with skin the color of deep mahogany and eyes that had seen everything from miraculous recoveries to senseless tragedies. She was not a woman who had time for performative grief. Bianca tapped her long manicured nails on the countertop. The clicking sound was sharp and impatient. Mrs. Higgins did not look up immediately. She finished typing a sentence on her computer, adjusted her glasses, and then slowly raised her eyes to look at Bianca. "Can I help you?" Mrs. Higgins asked, her voice calm and professional. "Yes, you can help me," Bianca said, snapping her fingers as if calling a waiter. "I am here to see my sister Nia. She was brought in 10 days ago after a car accident. I am her legal guardian." Chad stepped up beside her, leaning his elbows on the counter in a way that was meant to be intimidating. "Look, we are in a hurry. We have brought our own specialist to evaluate her. We need to get into her room immediately to get some papers signed." Mrs. Higgins looked from Bianca to Chad. She took in the phone that was still recording. She took in Chad's aggressive stance. She took in the absolute lack of genuine concern in their eyes. "You are here to see Nia," Mrs. Higgins repeated slowly. "Yes, Nia," Bianca said, rolling her eyes behind her sunglasses. "God, are all the staff here this slow? Look, I know she is probably in a coma or heavily sedated. I just need 5 minutes in the room. I have a power of attorney document that needs to be witnessed. It is for her own good. We are trying to save her assets." Chad nodded vigorously. "We are doing her a favor, really. Now stop wasting our time and tell us which room she is in, or I will be calling your hospital administrator. I know people on the board." The lobby was quiet. A few people in the waiting area looked over, sensing the tension. Mrs. Higgins stood up. She was not a tall woman, but in that moment she looked like a giant. She reached under the counter and pulled out a thick manila envelope. It was sealed with red wax and had the official stamp of the Cook County Court on the front. She placed the envelope on the counter with a heavy thud. Bianca lowered her phone slightly. "What is this?" she asked, her voice losing its fake sweetness. Mrs. Higgins crossed her arms. "You are looking for Nia." "Yes, that is what I said," Bianca hissed. "Well," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice carrying clearly across the lobby, "you are 10 days too late. Nia is not here." Bianca froze. Chad frowned. "What do you mean she is not here?" Chad asked. Did she pass away?" For a second, I could see a flicker of hope in Chad's eyes. If I had died, the house would automatically go to Bianca. No, she did not die, Mrs. Higgins said, her tone icy. She was discharged. Discharged, Bianca shrieked. That is impossible. The doctor said she had a severe concussion. You said she needed to be monitored. She was discharged 9 days ago, Mrs. Higgins said. She walked out of here on her own 2 feet, less than 24 hours after you two left her here and disappeared to go to Cabo. Bianca's mouth fell open. The phone in her hand tilted downward, filming the floor. Wait. 9 days ago. But I have been calling. I called every day to check on her. Mrs. Higgins smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator watching prey walk into a trap. Yes, you did call. And per the patient's strict instructions, we did not correct your assumption that she was still here. That is illegal, Chad shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. You cannot withhold information from family. We are her family. Mrs. Higgins tapped the envelope on the counter. Actually, we can. Nia signed a HIPAA privacy form blocking both of you from receiving any medical updates. She also left this for you. She said to give it to you if you ever had the audacity to show your faces here. Bianca stared at the envelope. Her hand trembled as she reached out to take it. She ripped it open. Inside was not a medical bill. It was a legal notice. I watched the color drain from Bianca's face as she read the first line. What is it? Chad asked, leaning over her shoulder. It is a restraining order, Bianca whispered. And, oh my God, what Chad demanded, grabbing the paper from her. He read it and his face turned a sickly shade of gray. It is a notice of foreclosure, but not from the bank. Bianca looked up at Mrs. Higgins, terror finally replacing the arrogance in her eyes. Mrs. Higgins leaned forward. Nia told me to give you a message. She said she enjoyed her stay at the Four Seasons Hotel while you two were partying in Mexico, and she said to tell you that the locks on the penthouse have been changed. Bianca dropped her phone. It hit the tile floor with a crack, but she did not even notice. I sat in my penthouse living room watching the security footage from the hospital lobby on my iPad. I took a slow sip of my red wine. They thought I was lying in a hospital bed, helpless and alone. They thought they had won. But they had no idea that for the last 10 days, while they were drinking margaritas and spending money they did not have, I was busy buying their debt. I am Nia. And this is the story of how I became my sister's landlord and her worst nightmare. To understand the sheer magnitude of the betrayal, you have to go back 2 weeks before the accident. To understand why I felt no guilt when I signed the foreclosure papers, you have to sit at our dining room table and feel the suffocation I lived with every single day. It was a Sunday evening in mid-November. The Chicago wind was already howling against the brick exterior of our childhood home. This house was a 3-story Victorian masterpiece in Hyde Park that my parents had bought 30 years ago. It was filled with mahogany furniture, hand-woven rugs, and memories of a time when we were a complete family. Since Mom and Dad passed away 6 months prior, within weeks of each other, I had stayed behind to maintain the property. I dusted the library, where my father read his medical journals. I tended the rose garden my mother loved. To me, this house was a sanctuary. To my sister, Bianca, and her husband, Chad, it was nothing more than a giant dollar sign waiting to be liquidated. They arrived 40 minutes late. Bianca swept in without an apology, throwing her coat onto the antique hallway bench that my mother had always insisted we treat with care. Chad followed, trailing the scent of expensive cologne and cigar smoke. He walked straight to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a generous glass of my father's 25-year-old scotch without asking. "Nice to see you too," I said, closing the front door against the cold. "Dinner has been ready for half an hour. The roast is probably dry." Bianca waved her hand dismissively, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "Oh, stop fussing, Nia. We are busy people. Chad was just wrapping up a massive conference call with investors from Dubai. Big things are happening." She walked into the dining room, her heels clicking loudly on the hardwood floors. She looked around the room with a critical eye. God, this place is so gloomy. It smells like old people. I do not know how you stand living here alone. It is depressing. It smells like home, I said quietly, serving the food. We sat down. The dynamic was instantly familiar. Bianca took the head of the table where our father used to sit. Chad sat to her right. I sat on the side, the perpetual guest in my own home. So Chad said, taking a bite of the roast and chewing loudly, "How is the little calculator job going, Nia? Still counting pennies for the corporate overlords?" I gripped my fork tighter. "I am a forensic accountant, Chad. I do not count pennies. I investigate large-scale financial fraud. I trace hidden assets and expose embezzlement." Chad laughed, a loud barking sound that grated on my nerves. Right, right. Sherlock Holmes with a spreadsheet. It sounds thrilling. Really, I do not know how you do it. I need action. I need the thrill of the deal. Real estate is where the real money is at. You know, I just closed on a commercial complex downtown. 3 million in equity, just like that. I took a sip of water to hide my expression. The tragedy of being a forensic accountant in a family of liars is that you see everything. I knew for a fact that Chad had not closed a deal in 6 months. I knew because I had seen the foreclosure notices for his own office space, which he had foolishly sent to this address by mistake before snatching them away. I knew his credit score was hovering in the 500s. I knew he was leasing that BMW outside on a high-interest predatory loan. But I said nothing. I was the scapegoat, the quiet one, the one who did not understand business. "That is great, Chad," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Bianca leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with that predatory shine I had come to dread. "Speaking of money, Nia, we need to talk. Chad and I have been discussing the estate." I put my fork down. The will had not been officially read yet, but we knew the basics. The house and the trust were to be divided. However, the execution of the will was moving slowly due to administrative backlogs in the probate court. "What about it?" I asked. "We think it is time to sell this place," Bianca said, gesturing around the room. "The market is peaking. Chad says we could get maybe 1.5 million for it, as is. If we tear it down and sell the land to developers, maybe 2. I felt a cold chill settle in my stomach. "Sell it. Bianca. We just buried Mom and Dad. This is our family history. Dad built those bookshelves himself. Mom planted that garden. Sentimental value does not pay the bills," Nia Chad interjected, leaning back in his chair. "Look, here's the play. We sell the house. We take the cash. You give your half to me to invest in my new crypto real estate venture. I can double your money in 6 months. Double it. You could quit that boring desk job and travel." I looked at Chad. I looked at his sweaty forehead and his desperate eyes. He was not a tycoon offering me an opportunity. He was a drowning man looking for a life raft. He needed the cash from this house to pay off his gambling debts and his failed investments. "I am not selling the house," I said firmly, "and I am definitely not investing in your venture, Chad." The air in the room changed instantly. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Bianca's smile vanished. "Excuse me," Bianca said, her voice low and dangerous. "What did you just say?" "I said no," I replied, looking her in the eye. "I am living here. I am maintaining the property. There is no rush to sell. And even if we did sell eventually, I would never put my inheritance into a high-risk speculative scheme." Chad slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "You ungrateful little brat. We are trying to help you. You think you are so smart with your degrees and your little investigations, but you do not know how the real world works. You have no vision." "Nia, listen to me," Bianca said, her voice taking on a condescending tone she used when we were children. "You are being selfish. Chad and I need liquidity right now to expand our brand. We are on the verge of becoming a power couple in this city. This house is just dead weight. It is a rotting pile of bricks. Why do you want to hold us back? Are you that jealous of my success?" I almost laughed. Success. I looked at her designer dress, which I knew she bought on a credit card that was maxed out. I looked at her fake Hermes bag sitting on the floor. "It is not about jealousy, Bianca," I said calmly. It is about security. This house is paid off. It is the only solid asset we have left. I am not going to liquidate it so Chad can gamble it away on digital coins and imaginary skyscrapers. Bianca stood up so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. How dare you? How dare you insult my husband? You have always been like this. Bitter, small-minded. Mom and Dad always said you were the difficult one. That was a lie. Mom and Dad had relied on me for everything in their final years while Bianca was busy partying in Miami. But in Bianca's rewritten history, she was the angel and I was the burden. I am not signing anything, I said, standing up to face her. The house stays. Bianca narrowed her eyes. Her face twisted into a mask of pure ugliness. You think you have a choice. I am the executor, Nia. I am the oldest. When the probate clears, I am going to sell this place right out from under you. You will be on the street. You can try, I said. But I have rights. I am a beneficiary too. Chad stood up and buttoned his jacket. Come on, Bianca, we are leaving. She is obviously having one of her episodes. We will handle this through the lawyers. Do not expect an invite to the gala next week, Nia. You are clearly not family material right now. They stormed out, leaving the front door wide open, letting the freezing wind rush into the warm house. I walked over and slammed it shut, locking the deadbolt. My hands were shaking not from fear but from rage. I went back to the dining room and looked at their untouched plates. I looked at the empty glass of my father's scotch. That night, as I cleaned up the dishes, I realized something. They did not just want the money. They wanted to erase me. To them, I was just an obstacle standing between them and the lifestyle they felt entitled to. They did not care about my well-being. They did not care about our parents' legacy. They were parasites, and they had just announced that they were ready to feed. I sat in the library later that night, looking at the financial reports I had pulled on Chad's company earlier that week. I had hesitated to use them. I had thought it was too aggressive. But after tonight, I realized I had been bringing a notebook to a knife fight. If they wanted a war over this house, they were going to get one. But I never imagined how far they would go. I never imagined that their greed would turn into violence. I thought we were fighting over bricks and mortar. I did not know that in 2 weeks' time, they would be willing to leave me to die on the side of a highway just to get their hands on the deed. The seeds of hatred were not just planted that night. They were watered, fertilized, and given plenty of sunlight. And as I turned off the lights in the empty house, I knew one thing for sure. I was not going anywhere. The morning of the accident, the sky was a bruised purple color, hanging low and heavy over Chicago. It was the kind of weather that made your bones ache. I was sitting at my kitchen island drinking black coffee when my phone buzzed. It was Bianca. Nia, please pick up, she said, her voice thick with what sounded like tears. I cannot stop crying. I miss Mom and Dad so much today. Please, I need to go to the cemetery, but Chad has the car at the shop. Can you drive me? Against my better judgment, I felt a pang of sympathy. Despite everything, she was my sister, and grief does strange things to people. I thought maybe this was a breakthrough. Maybe she finally wanted to mourn instead of scheme. I will be there in 20 minutes, I said. That was the last mistake I made as the old Nia, the naive Nia. When I pulled up to their rented townhouse in my reliable 4-year-old sedan, Bianca was waiting on the curb. She was not alone. Chad was standing next to her, checking his watch, with that perpetual look of impatience. I unlocked the doors and they piled in. Bianca took the passenger seat and Chad squeezed his large frame into the back. I thought it was just us, I said, pulling away from the curb. Chad wanted to pay his respects too, Bianca said, buckling her seatbelt. She was not crying anymore. In fact, her eyes were dry and she was furiously typing on her phone. The drive to the cemetery was usually quiet, a time for reflection, but the air in the car felt charged like static electricity before a storm. So Nia, Chad said, leaning forward between the front seats. His breath smelled of stale coffee and mints. Bianca tells me you are still refusing to sign the release forms for the house. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. We are going to visit our parents' graves, Chad. I am not discussing real estate right now. We do not have time for sentimentality, Chad snapped. The market is shifting. We have a buyer lined up who is willing to pay cash, but he needs to close by Friday. You are holding up a $3 million deal because you want to keep a dusty library and some old rose bushes. I looked at Bianca. She was staring out the window, refusing to meet my eyes. Is that why you called me? I asked, my voice rising. There is no car in the shop, is there? You just wanted to get me in a confined space to ambush me. Bianca turned to me then, and the mask of the grieving daughter vanished completely, replaced by the cold, hard face of a woman who was drowning in debt. We are not going to the cemetery, Nia, she said flatly. I slammed on the brakes at a red light. Excuse me. Turn left up here, Bianca instructed, ignoring my outrage. We have an appointment with our family attorney at 10 o'clock. He has the papers drafted. You are going to sign them today, so we can save ourselves. I felt the blood rushing in my ears. You lied to me. You used Mom and Dad as bait. I am doing what needs to be done, Bianca yelled. You are being a child. We need this money. Do you not understand? We are going to lose everything if you do not sign. That is not my problem, I said. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to move. I am not going to the lawyer. I am taking you home. I put the blinker on to make a U-turn. Do not you dare turn this car around, Chad shouted from the back seat. Drive to the lawyer, Nia. Just drive the damn car. I am done listening to you, I said, initiating the turn. Suddenly, Bianca lunged. She reached across the center console and grabbed the steering wheel. No, she screamed, yanking the wheel hard to the right. You are going to listen to me for once. The car swerved violently. We were on a winding road near the forest preserve, a stretch of asphalt bordered by dense trees and a steep embankment. Bianca let go. I screamed, fighting for control. She did not let go. She pulled harder, her nails digging into the leather. The car hydroplaned on a patch of slick, wet leaves. I remember the sound of tires screeching, a horrible, high-pitched wail that seemed to last forever. I remember Chad shouting something unintelligible, and then the world turned upside down. We hit the guardrail, but the momentum was too strong. The car flipped over the edge, rolling down the embankment. The sound of metal crunching and glass shattering was deafening. My head slammed against the side window. Once, twice. Then silence. A heavy, ringing silence that felt like being underwater. I woke up to the smell of gasoline and wet earth. My vision was blurry, a kaleidoscope of gray and green. I tried to move, but a sharp, searing pain shot through my left leg and up my spine. My seatbelt was locked tight, pinning me against the crushed driver's side door. I tasted copper in my mouth. Blood. I turned my head slowly, every millimeter sending waves of nausea through me. Bianca was shifting in the passenger seat. The airbags had deployed, cushioning her impact. She was groaning, rubbing her neck, but she was moving. She was unbuckling her seatbelt. Chad, I heard her whisper. Chad, are you okay? I am fine. Chad's voice came from the back. He sounded shaken but unhurt. His door had flown open during the roll. I am climbing out. I tried to speak, but it came out as a gurgle. Help, I managed to whisper. Help me. Bianca froze. She looked over at me. Her eyes were wide, but not with concern. She looked at the blood running down my forehead. She looked at my leg trapped under the crushed dashboard. She is awake, Chad said, crawling around to the passenger window. He peered in. He looked at me like I was a broken appliance, not a human being. Is she bad? Bianca asked. She looks pretty bad. Chad assessed, his voice devoid of emotion. That dash crushed her leg. She is losing a lot of blood. Call 911, I rasped. Please. Bianca reached for her phone, which had fallen into the footwell. She picked it up. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then she stopped. She looked at Chad. Then she looked back at me. A strange, terrifying calculation appeared in her eyes. If she dies, Bianca whispered the words hanging in the cold air like poison. If she dies, the trust dissolves. I am the sole beneficiary. I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather seize my heart. Bianca, what are you saying? Think about it, Chad said softly. He did not reach for his phone either. If we call for help, she survives. She sues us. We go to jail for causing the accident. We lose the house. We lose everything. But if we leave, Bianca trailed off. If we leave, nature takes its course, Chad finished. No one saw us get in the car. We took the back roads. We can walk back to the main road and call an Uber. Say we were hiking. Say we have not seen her all day. I watched my sister process this. I watched the battle between humanity and greed play out on her face. It lasted less than 5 seconds. Greed won. She put her phone in her pocket. I am sorry, Nia, she said. Her voice was trembling, but not with regret. It was trembling with adrenaline. You should have just signed the papers. You brought this on yourself. No, I whispered, tears mixing with the blood on my face. You cannot. Let's go, Chad said, reaching in to help Bianca climb out of the wrecked car. Hurry before a car comes by up on the road. They scrambled out of the ravine. I heard their footsteps crunching on the dead leaves, getting fainter and fainter. I was alone. The pain was overwhelming, threatening to pull me back into the darkness. I could smell the gasoline stronger now. The car was a ticking time bomb. As my eyes started to close, unable to fight the exhaustion anymore, a tiny flash of light caught my attention. Mounted on the windshield, miraculously untouched by the crash, was my dashcam. The small red LED light was blinking steadily in the gloom. Blink, blink, blink. It was running on its backup battery. It had recorded the argument. It had recorded Bianca grabbing the wheel. And it had recorded every single word of their conversation after the crash. They thought they were leaving a corpse behind. They thought they were walking away with a clean slate and a $3 million inheritance. I stared at that blinking red light, holding onto it like a lifeline. I forced myself to memorize the rhythm. I forced myself to stay angry. You made a mistake, Bianca, I thought, as the darkness finally took me. You didn't check the camera. And that mistake is going to cost you everything. The beeping of the heart monitor was the first thing that pulled me out of the darkness. It was a rhythmic, persistent sound that seemed to drill directly into my skull. I tried to open my eyes, but the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room forced them shut again. My entire body felt like one giant bruise. My left leg was encased in a heavy cast and elevated on a sling. My head was wrapped in bandages. For a moment I did not remember where I was. I thought perhaps I was back in my bed at the penthouse and this was just a nightmare brought on by too much work. But then the smell hit me. That antiseptic clinical smell that no amount of cleaning can ever truly mask. Then the memories crashed into me like a physical blow. The argument in the car. Bianca grabbing the steering wheel. The terrifying sensation of weightlessness as we rolled over the edge. And the cold, calculating voices of my sister and her husband deciding to leave me there to die. I gasped, sitting up too quickly. The room spun violently, and nausea clawed at my throat. Easy there, honey, a voice said. I blinked until the room came into focus. A woman in blue scrubs was standing by the door holding a clipboard. It was Mrs. Higgins, the head nurse. At the time, I did not know how important she would become to my story. I just saw a woman looking at me with a mixture of professional detachment and deep pity. You are lucky to be alive, she said, walking over to check my IV drip. A truck driver saw the smoke from the ravine. He pulled you out just before the fuel tank caught fire. I stared at her, my throat dry as sandpaper. Did he see anyone else? Mrs. Higgins shook her head. He said you were alone in the vehicle. The passenger doors were open, but no one was there. He thought maybe you were driving alone. I closed my eyes. They had not just left. They had vanished so completely that a witness thought I had crashed on my own. It was the perfect crime. If I had died in that fire, It would have been ruled a tragic accident caused by weather conditions. Bianca would have played the grieving sister and cashed the checks. Mrs. Higgins adjusted my pillow. We found your ID in your purse. We tried to contact your emergency contact. A Bianca Miller. My heart hammered against my ribs. I waited for her to say that Bianca was rushing over, that maybe I had hallucinated the conversation in the ravine, that maybe my sister actually loved me. She answered, Mrs. Higgins said, but her tone changed. It became colder, harder. She did not ask how you were. She did not ask if you were in pain. What did she say? I whispered. Mrs. Higgins looked down at her clipboard. She told me that you have a history of mental instability. She said you might be hysterical or delusional when you wake up. She instructed us to keep you heavily sedated. She said, and I quote, "Do not let her leave, and do not let her talk to anyone until I get back from my business trip." She emphasized that we should use the maximum dose of sedatives necessary to keep you quiet. The silence in the room was deafening. There it was, the final nail in the coffin of our sisterhood. Bianca did not want me healed. She wanted me silenced. She wanted me drugged and incoherent so that by the time she returned she could have me declared incompetent. She could take power of attorney over my medical and financial decisions. She was not just stealing my house, she was stealing my life. A cold clarity washed over me. The physical pain in my leg and head seemed to recede, pushed back by a burning white-hot rage. I looked at Mrs. Higgins. "I am not crazy," I said, my voice steady despite the pain. "I know," Mrs. Higgins replied quietly. "I have been a nurse for 30 years. I know a concerned relative when I hear one, and I know a conspirator when I hear one. Your sister sounded like she was ordering a hit, not checking on a patient." "I need to leave," I said. Mrs. Higgins raised an eyebrow. "You have a severe concussion and a fractured tibia. You should be here for at least a week." "If I stay here, I am a sitting duck," I told her. "If she calls back and finds out I am awake and lucid, she will come back to finish the job. Or she will send Chad. I cannot be here." Mrs. Higgins studied my face. She looked at the fire in my eyes. She closed the clipboard with a snap. "Technically," she said, lowering her voice, "you are an adult. You are conscious and oriented. Unless a court order says otherwise, you have the right to leave against medical advice. However, I cannot officially recommend it. But you can help me," I asked. Mrs. Higgins walked to the door and looked into the hallway to make sure no one was listening. Then she turned back to me. "My shift ends in 20 minutes. I can bring you some scrubs from the supply closet. Your clothes were destroyed in the fire." "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "Because I have a sister too," Mrs. Higgins said. "And if she ever did to me what yours did to you, I would want someone to help me burn her world to the ground." That night, under the cover of darkness, I wheeled myself out of the hospital service exit. The pain in my leg was excruciating, a throbbing reminder of the betrayal. Every bump in the sidewalk felt like a knife twisting in my bone, but I gritted my teeth and kept moving. I did not go home. Home was the first place they would look. And besides, they were probably already there measuring the drapes and counting the silverware. I hailed a cab on the corner. The driver looked at my wheelchair and my hospital wristband with suspicion, but a $100 bill from the emergency cash stash I kept in my bra silenced his questions. "Take me to the Motel 6 on the outskirts of town," I told him. "The one near the airport." It was a dingy place, the kind of motel where people went to hide or to do things they did not want their spouses to know about. The neon sign buzzed ominously, and the carpet in the lobby smelled of stale cigarettes and regret. It was a far cry from my penthouse, but it was perfect. It was off the grid. I paid cash for the room for 2 weeks, no credit cards, no paper trail. Once I was in the room, I sat on the lumpy mattress and stared at the water stains on the ceiling. My leg throbbed, my head spun. I was exhausted, but I knew I could not sleep. Not yet. I hobbled to the window and looked out at the parking lot. There was a 7-Eleven across the street. I made the painful journey across the asphalt. I bought a prepaid burner phone and a laptop charger. I bought junk food because I knew I would not be going out to eat. Back in the room, I sat down and powered up the phone. My fingers hovered over the keypad. The logical thing to do would be to call the police. I had the dashcam footage on the cloud. I had the testimony of Mrs. Higgins. I could have Bianca and Chad arrested for leaving the scene of an accident and reckless endangerment. They would probably get a few years in minimum security prison. Maybe probation if they got a good lawyer. But as I sat there in the dim light of that motel room, I realized that prison was too good for them. Prison would give them 3 meals a day. Prison would give them a roof over their heads. Bianca loved luxury, she loved status. She loved the feeling of being superior to everyone else. Chad loved feeling powerful. He loved thinking he was the smartest man in the room. If I sent them to jail, they would just be victims. They would spin a story about how it was an accident and how the justice system failed them. They would still have their pride. No, I did not want justice. I wanted annihilation. I wanted to strip them of everything they held dear. I wanted to take their money. I wanted to take their reputation. I wanted to take the house they killed for. I wanted them to be on the street with nothing but the clothes on their backs, realizing that the scapegoat sister they stepped over was the one holding the keys to their destruction. I opened the laptop I had managed to salvage from my bag. The screen flickered to life. I logged into my secure work server. My job as a forensic accountant was to find things that people wanted to keep hidden. I spent my days tracking illegal wires, uncovering shell companies, and exposing fraud. I was good at it. I was the best, and for the first time in my career, I was going to use those skills for personal reasons. I cracked my knuckles, ignoring the pain in my wrist. "Okay, Bianca," I whispered to the empty room. "You want to play games with my life? Let's play." I started typing. The first thing I did was access the joint bank account Bianca had convinced me to open years ago for family emergencies. She thought I had forgotten about it. She thought it was dormant. I logged in and saw the activity. Transfers to offshore gambling sites, payments to a luxury car leasing company, and a massive pending deposit from a predatory lending company. They had forged my signature. I looked at the date of the loan application. It was dated the day of the accident. They had applied for the loan hours before they picked me up. They knew they were going to get rid of me one way or another. I felt a cold smile spread across my face. I pulled up the lender's information. It was a shady LLC known for high interest rates and aggressive collection tactics. They did not care about credit scores. They cared about collateral. And the collateral was my parents' house. Bianca and Chad had sold a house they did not own to a shark. Perfect. I spent the next 6 hours building a digital profile of my sister's life. I found her credit card statements. I found Chad's secret emails to his mistress. I found the unpaid taxes they were hiding from the IRS. By the time the sun came up, I had a roadmap of their destruction. I was not just going to sue them, I was going to become the bank they owed money to. I was going to become the landlord they could not pay. I was going to surround them on all sides until they had nowhere to turn but to me. And then I was going to close the door. I finally lay back on the pillows, the exhaustion overtaking me. I looked at the burner phone on the nightstand. I set an alarm for 10 days from now. 10 days. That was how long Bianca said she would be gone. That was how long she thought it would take for me to die or go crazy. I closed my eyes. Enjoy your vacation, Bianca, I thought. Because when you get back, you are going to find out that the little sister you left in the ditch has become the monster under your bed. I drifted into a restless sleep, dreaming of balance sheets and foreclosure notices. The old Nia died in that ravine. The Nia that woke up in this motel room was something entirely different, and she was hungry for blood. For the next 48 hours, the glow of my laptop screen was the only light in room 204. I ignored the throbbing in my leg and the stale smell of the motel carpet. I was in my element. People think accounting is boring. They think it is just numbers and columns and rows. But to a forensic accountant, numbers are a language. They tell stories of greed and desperation and fear. And I was about to read the biography of my sister's destruction. I started with the basics. Access. Most people think hacking involves complex code and black screens, but usually it just involves knowing someone's laziness. Bianca was obsessed with her image, but she was incredibly lazy with administrative details. We had shared a family iCloud account since I was in college because she constantly ran out of storage for her thousands of selfies and wanted to use my data plan. She had never bothered to remove me because she liked having access to the paid apps I purchased. That laziness was the key to the kingdom. I logged into the cloud and waited for the synchronization to finish. Slowly but surely, her digital life began to populate on my screen. Photos, notes, calendar invites, and most importantly, documents. I started with Chad, my brother-in-law who claimed to be a titan of real estate. He walked around in $3,000 suits and drove a leased BMW, but I had always suspected he was hollow. I just did not realize how hollow until I opened his synchronized messages. There were no emails from investors in Dubai. There were no contracts for commercial skyscrapers. Instead, I found a trail of digital breadcrumbs leading straight to the dark underbelly of the internet. Chad was not a businessman. He was a gambling addict. I pulled up his transaction history. It was a disaster. Thousands of dollars transferred to offshore crypto wallets. Massive withdrawals at casino ATMs in Gary, Indiana at 3 in the morning. And then I found the smoking gun. It was a series of text messages from a number saved only as NK. I opened the thread and felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the motel air conditioning. The texts were brutal. NK wrote, "You are 2 weeks late, Chad. The interest is compounding." Chad replied, "I have a deal closing soon, I swear. Big liquidity event coming. Just give me 10 days." NK wrote back, "You have 5. Or we come for the knees. Then we come for the wife." I cross-referenced the dates. This text exchange happened 2 days before the accident. The debt was $500,000. Chad did not just need money for a new car or a vacation. He owed $500,000 to what looked like organized crime. He was a dead man walking. Suddenly, the desperation in the car made sense. The way he screamed at me to drive to the lawyer, the way they left me in the ditch. They were not just greedy, they were terrified. They needed my inheritance to pay off a hitman, essentially. I took a screenshot and saved it to an encrypted folder. That was nail number 1 in their coffin. Then I turned my attention to Bianca. If Chad was the desperate gambler, Bianca was the master forger. I navigated to her recent downloads folder. I found a PDF file named simply Loan Agreement Final. I opened it and my breath caught in my throat. It was a mortgage document, but not from a bank. It was from a company called Apex Capital Solutions. I knew this company. In my line of work, we called them predatory lenders. They targeted people with bad credit and desperate needs. They offered quick cash with interest rates that bordered on illegal and terms that were designed to make you fail. I scrolled down to the signature page. There it was. My name. Nia Wilson. The signature looked almost perfect. It had the loops and the slant that I had used since high school. Bianca had practiced. She had traced my signature from old birthday cards or checks and replicated it here. Next to my forged name was hers, and next to that was a notary stamp dated the morning of the accident. They had notarized the document before I had even picked them up. I read the terms of the loan and I felt sick. They had put the house up as collateral for a high-risk short-term loan of $600,000. The interest rate was 40%. But the kicker was the default clause. The contract stated that if the full amount plus interest was not repaid within 15 days, the lender had the right to immediate foreclosure and possession of the property. 15 days. I looked at the calendar. 10 days had passed since the accident. That was why Bianca had gone to Mexico. She wasn't just partying, she was hiding. She and Chad had taken the initial cash payout from this loan, probably used most of it to pay off Chad's bookie to save his legs, and then fled the country to wait out the clock. They expected me to die or be incapacitated. If I was out of the picture, they could claim the insurance money or sell the house quickly to pay back the predatory lender before the 15 days were up. But they had miscalculated. They had burned through the cash and the deadline was looming. They had 5 days left to pay back Apex Capital or they would lose the house anyway, and since they had spent the money on Chad's debts, they had no way to pay it back. Their only plan was to come back, force me to sign over the deed legally, and then flip the house to a developer instantly to cover the loan. It was a house of cards built on a foundation of lies and forgery. I sat back in my chair and rubbed my temples. The picture was complete. Chad owed the mob. Bianca forged my signature to get a loan from sharks to pay the mob. Now they were broke again, and the sharks were coming for the house in 5 days. They needed me to be compliant. They needed me to be the submissive little sister who would sign whatever piece of paper they put in front of her to save the family. I looked at the forged signature again. That was a felony. Fraud. Identity theft. Grand larceny. I could call the police right now. I could send this PDF to the district attorney and have them arrested at the airport. But that felt too easy. If I arrested them now, they would go to jail, but the house would still be entangled with Apex Capital. I would have to spend years in court proving the signature was fake to save my parents' home. The predatory lender would fight me. They would put a lien on the property. It would be a mess. No, I needed a cleaner solution. I needed a solution that saved the house and destroyed Bianca and Chad simultaneously. I opened a new browser tab and searched for Apex Capital Solutions. I looked up their corporate structure. As I suspected, they were a private equity firm that bought distressed debt. They did not care about families or ethics. They cared about profit. I checked my own bank accounts. Between my savings, my investment portfolio, and the settlement from a massive corporate fraud case I had cracked last year, I had liquidity. Significant liquidity. I picked up my burner phone. It was 3 in the morning, but finance never sleeps. I dialed the number of a private wealth manager I had worked with on previous cases, a man who knew how to move money quickly and quietly. "Robert," I said when he answered. "It is Nia. I need you to set up a shell company. LLC. Name it something generic. Phoenix Holdings." "Nia." Robert's voice was groggy. "Are you okay? I heard you were in an accident." "I am fine," I said, my voice hard. "Better than fine. I am looking to make an acquisition." "What are we buying?" he asked. "Debt," I said. "I want to buy a specific high-risk loan portfolio from Apex Capital Solutions. They have a distressed asset that is about to default in 5 days. I want to buy the note." "You want to become the lender?" Robert asked, sounding confused. "Why?" "Because," I said, looking at the forged signature on my screen. "The borrowers are about to default. And when they do, I want to be the one holding the gavel." I spent the next 6 hours drafting the paperwork. By the time the sun came up over the motel parking lot, I was not just Nia Wilson, the victim. I was Phoenix Holdings. I owned their debt. I owned the mortgage they had fraudulently taken out. I owned the $500,000 hole they had dug for themselves. Bianca and Chad were flying back from Cabo today, thinking they were coming home to manipulate a brain-damaged sister. They had no idea that while they were sipping margaritas, I had bought the ground beneath their feet. I closed my laptop and stood up, testing my weight on my injured leg. It still hurt, but the pain felt different now. It was fuel. I packed my bag. It was time to check out of the motel. My sister wanted a family reunion. I was going to give her one she would never forget. But first I had one more stop to make. I needed to visit the house. I needed to see what they had done to my sanctuary. And I needed to prepare the stage for the final act. I put on my sunglasses and walked out into the morning light. The hunt was over. The execution was about to begin. The offices of Apex Capital Solutions were located in a glass tower in the Loop, but not on one of the prestigious upper floors. They occupied a suite on the 4th level, just above the noise of the street. It was fitting. They were bottom feeders dressed in Italian suits. I walked in wearing a tailored black blazer and stilettos I had purchased that morning. I had done my hair and covered the bruising on my forehead with heavy concealer. I did not look like an accident victim. I looked like a shark looking for blood in the water. The receptionist looked at my appointment card. "Phoenix Holdings," she said. "You are here to see Mr. Sterling." I nodded. "He is expecting me." Mr. Sterling was a man who smelled of desperation and expensive hair gel. He shook my hand with a grip that was too firm, trying to assert dominance. He had no idea he was shaking hands with the woman who was about to eat his lunch. "Please sit down, Ms. Wilson," he said, glancing at the name on my business card. "Or should I call you Phoenix?" "Ms. Wilson is fine," I said, taking a seat. I did not smile. I was not there to make friends. "I am here about the distressed asset portfolio you listed on the private exchange this morning, specifically the loan secured by the property in Hyde Park." Sterling raised an eyebrow. "That is a very specific interest. Usually investors buy in bundles." "Why that one?" "Because I know the property." I lied, smooth as silk. "I know the valuation is solid, and I know the borrowers are high risk. I am looking for a quick foreclosure and acquisition." Sterling leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Well, you are right about the risk. The borrowers are currently unreachable. We were preparing to initiate default proceedings ourselves." "I can save you the legal fees," I said, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside was a cashier's check, $700,000. "That covers the principal, the interest, and a generous premium for your trouble. I want the note assigned to Phoenix Holdings effective immediately." Sterling looked at the check. His eyes widened. It was immediate liquid cash. For a company like Apex, cash was oxygen. He did not care about the borrowers. He did not care about the ethics. He just saw a payday. He picked up the check. "You understand that once you buy the note, you assume all liability for the collection. If they destroy the house or fight the eviction, that is your problem." "I am counting on it," I said. He signed the papers. 10 minutes later, I walked out of that office with a thick file tucked under my arm. The weight of it felt good. It felt like justice. I stopped at a coffee shop down the street and opened the file. There it was, the original loan agreement, the forged signature staring back at me. But now at the top of the page, stamped in red ink, were the words, "Assigned to Phoenix Holdings, LLC." I ran my finger over the stamp. Technically, I now owned the debt. Legally, I was the only person standing between Bianca and homelessness. If I wanted to, I could forgive the loan. I could tear this paper up and let them keep the house. I took a sip of my espresso. Not a chance. Now that I held the whip, it was time to make them dance. I took out my burner phone and dialed a number I had memorized. Marcus. My personal attorney answered on the second ring. Marcus was the kind of lawyer you paid a retainer to just so he would not work for your enemies. He was ruthless, efficient, and had been helping me hide my wealth for years. "It is done," I said. "I have the note," good Marcus replied. "The transfer is recorded. Phoenix Holdings is officially the lien holder. What is the next move?" "They are landing in Chicago in 3 hours," I said, checking the time. "They will be panicked. They know the payment is due in 5 days. They are coming back to bully me into signing the house over so they can sell it and pay Apex." "They do not know Apex sold the debt," Marcus noted. "Exactly," I said. "And I want to keep them comfortable. If they think the walls are closing in, they might do something erratic. I need them arrogant. I need them to think they have won." I paused, watching the city traffic outside the window. "Send the email, Marcus." The email was a masterpiece of legal fiction. We had drafted it the night before. It was to be sent from Marcus's firm to Chad's email address. It read, "Dear Mr. Miller, we are writing to update you on the probate status of the estate. Due to the continued unavailability of the co-beneficiary, Nia Wilson, and the medical reports indicating her incapacity, the court is prepared to grant temporary executive powers to Bianca Miller to expedite asset liquidation. We expect the final order to be signed within 48 hours. Please prepare the property for immediate listing." It was a lie, a complete fabrication. The court had said no such thing. But Chad and Bianca did not know probate law. They only knew what they wanted to hear. I imagined the scene when they landed. They would turn on their phones as the plane taxied to the gate. Chad would see the email. He would read it to Bianca. The tension that had been crushing them for 10 days would evaporate. They would think I was still in a coma or locked away in a psych ward thanks to their instructions. They would think the court had sided with them. They would think the house was theirs to sell. They would think they had gotten away with murder. And when people think they have gotten away with something, they celebrate. I went back to the motel to change. I packed my suit and my heels. I put on a pair of dark jeans and a hoodie, pulling the hood up to cover my face. I checked out of the room, leaving the keycard on the dresser. The motel manager did not look up as I left. I was just another ghost passing through. I took a cab to Hyde Park, but I did not go to the house. Not yet. I had the cab drop me off a block away. I walked down the familiar street, keeping my head down. The leaves were turning brown on the trees. The wind was biting. I stopped across the street from my parents' house. It looked the same as always. The brick was sturdy, the windows were dark. But there was a for sale sign already planted in the front lawn. They had not even waited for the paperwork. They had listed it before they even left for Cabo. I stood in the shadows of an oak tree and waited. An hour later, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. Bianca and Chad got out. They looked tan and rested. Bianca was wearing a white linen suit that was completely inappropriate for Chicago in November. Chad was wearing sunglasses and laughing. He said something to Bianca and she threw her head back and laughed too. It was a sound of pure relief. They walked up the front steps. Chad fumbled with his keys. They opened the door and walked into my house. I watched the lights flicker on one by one. First the hallway, then the kitchen, then the living room. They were home. They thought they were the kings of the castle. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app for Phoenix Holdings. I set up an automated alert. In exactly 5 days at midnight, the loan would default. At 1 minute past midnight, the foreclosure notice would be generated automatically. But I was not going to wait 5 days. I watched through the living room window. I could see them moving around. Chad was opening a bottle of champagne. Bianca was dancing, spinning around the room with her arms wide. They were celebrating my death. They were toasting to the fact that they had erased me. I felt a cold calm settle over me. It was a terrifying feeling. I realized in that moment that I did not hate them anymore. Hate implies passion. Hate implies that you care about the person enough to have an emotional reaction. I did not care about them. I looked at them the same way I looked at a column of red numbers on a spreadsheet. They were an error, a discrepancy, and I was the correction. I turned away from the house and walked down the street. "Enjoy the champagne, Chad," I whispered. "It is the last expensive bottle you will ever drink." I checked into a boutique hotel downtown, using my real name and my black card. I ordered room service. I took a long, hot bath. I washed the smell of the motel and the hospital off my skin. Tomorrow was going to be a busy day. I had to meet with the police to file the final report. I had to coordinate with the movers I had secretly hired. And I had to pick out the outfit I would wear to their party. Because of course they would throw a party. Bianca could never do anything quietly. If she thought she had won, she would want an audience, and I would be more than happy to attend. As I drifted off to sleep in the plush hotel bed, I thought about the envelope I had left with Mrs. Higgins. It was a backup plan, a dramatic flair, but the real weapon was the file sitting on the nightstand next to me, the assignment of debt. I slept better that night than I had in years. The nightmare was over. The reckoning had begun. The evening of the 10th day arrived wrapped in a shroud of fog that rolled off Lake Michigan, but inside my parents' house the atmosphere was anything but gloomy. From where I sat in the back seat of a tinted town car parked down the block, I could see the property glowing like a beacon. Every light was on. The windows, which my mother had always kept draped to protect the antique furniture from the sun, were wide open, exposing the interior to the street. It was not a wake. It was a coronation. Bianca had wasted no time. She had sent out the invites the moment they landed from Cabo. She called it a celebration of life and resilience, but anyone with eyes could see it was a victory lap. The driveway was packed with luxury cars, Porsches, Range Rovers, Maseratis. None of them belonged to family. They belonged to the entourage of influencers, hangers-on, and shallow socialites that Bianca cultivated to validate her existence. I watched as a catering van unloaded crates of champagne. I watched as a DJ set up his equipment in the foyer, right next to the grandfather clock that had been in our family for 4 generations. The bass began to thump, vibrating the very foundation of the house. It was a desecration. Inside, the party was in full swing. I pulled up the live feed from the security cameras I had installed months ago. Bianca had never noticed them because she never looked at anything that did not reflect her own image. The living room was crowded. People were using my father's medical encyclopedias as coasters. A woman in a sequined dress was spilling red wine on the Persian rug my mother had bought in Istanbul. Chad was holding court by the fireplace, smoking a cigar inside the house, something my father would have never permitted. He looked triumphant. He was laughing loudly, clapping men on the back, acting the part of the benevolent lord of the manor. I zoomed in on the camera feed. Chad was talking to a man in a cheap suit. I recognized him. It was a shady real estate developer named Vinny, who was known for buying historic homes, tearing them down, and putting up soulless glass condos. Tomorrow morning, Chad said, his voice booming over the microphone of the camera. We sign at 9. I want the wire hit by noon. Do not worry, Vinny replied, grinning like a jackal. The paperwork is ready. As soon as the court order comes through declaring your sister incompetent, we are good to go. I will have the bulldozers here by next week. Bulldozers. I felt a flash of heat in my chest. They were not just going to sell it. They were going to erase it. They were going to wipe every trace of my parents' existence off the map to pay for their gambling debts and their fake lifestyle. Chad took a long drag of his cigar and exhaled a cloud of gray smoke into the room. Just make sure the check clears fast. I have some creditors breathing down my neck. Apex. Capital, Vinny asked, lowering his voice. Among others, Chad said nervously, tapping ash onto the floor. But once we sell this place, I am clear. Fresh start, baby. He had no idea. He thought he was racing against a clock that I controlled. He thought Apex Capital was some faceless corporation waiting for their money. He did not know that the creditor breathing down his neck was currently sitting a block away, checking her lipstick in the rearview mirror. Suddenly, the music cut out. A hush fell over the room as Bianca stepped onto the landing of the grand staircase. She looked stunning in a twisted, grotesque way. She was wearing a white silk gown that pooled around her feet. She had hired a makeup artist to give her a look of fragile beauty. Pale skin, minimal eye makeup. She looked like a grieving angel. Thank you all for coming, she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. The crowd murmured their support. Phones were raised, capturing the moment for Instagram stories. As you all know, this has been the hardest week of my life. Bianca continued, placing a hand over her heart. My baby sister Nia. My poor, sweet Nia. She paused to wipe away a non-existent tear. The doctors say the accident took a terrible toll on her mind. She is not the Nia we knew anymore. She is confused, paranoid. She requires constant care in a specialized facility. It breaks my heart to say it, but she may never be independent again. A collective gasp went through the room. It is a tragedy. Bianca sighed, leaning against the banister for effect. But I promised my parents before they passed that I would always take care of her. And that is why I have made the difficult decision to take control of the estate. Not for me, but for her. To pay for her medical bills. To ensure she is comfortable. Liar. I watched the screen, my hands clenched into fists. She was declaring me insane to a room full of strangers just to justify stealing my inheritance. She was painting herself as the savior while she planned to throw me into a state-run facility and burn through the money. So tonight, Bianca said, raising a crystal flute of champagne, I want to propose a toast to family, to resilience, and to doing what must be done even when it hurts. To Nia. To Nia, the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. Chad walked over and put his arm around Bianca, kissing her on the temple. "You are so strong, honey," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You are the rock of this family." I signaled the driver. "It is time," I said. The car moved slowly down the street. My heart was pounding not with fear, but with the adrenaline of the hunt. I had waited 10 days for this moment. I had endured the pain of the accident. I had endured the humiliation of being abandoned. I had endured the silence. Now I was going to make some noise. As the car pulled into the driveway, the valet looked confused. He waved his hand trying to tell the driver that the lot was full. The driver ignored him and parked directly in front of the main entrance, blocking the path of anyone trying to leave. I checked my appearance one last time. I was not wearing white. I was wearing a blood-red power suit, sharp-tailored and terrifying. I wore my hair slicked back. I wore the diamond earrings my mother had left specifically to me, the ones Bianca had tried to steal at the funeral. I stepped out of the car. The night air was cold, but I felt nothing but heat. I walked up the steps past the stunned valet. I could hear the music starting up again inside. They were celebrating. They were drinking my father's scotch and laughing at my expense. I reached the heavy oak front door. I did not knock. I did not ring the bell. I punched in the security code on the smart lock. Bianca had tried to change the physical locks, but she had forgotten that I was the one who installed the smart home system. I had a master override code that she could never delete. The lock beeped cheerfully. The mechanism clicked open. I pushed the door open and stepped into the foyer. For a moment, no one noticed me. The bass was too loud. The laughter was too raucous. Then the DJ saw me. He was setting up the next track when he looked up and froze. His hand slipped on the turntable, causing a screeching scratch sound that cut through the room like a knife. The music stopped. One by one, heads turned. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing a shift in the energy. Bianca was standing by the fireplace accepting condolences from a local news anchor. She was smiling a sad, brave smile. Then she saw the look on the anchor's face. She turned around. Her eyes met mine across the crowded room. The glass of champagne slipped from her fingers. It hit the hearth and shattered, spraying shards of crystal and expensive liquid everywhere. "Nia," she whispered. The name rippled through the room. Nia. The sister who was supposed to be in a coma. The sister who was supposed to be brain damaged. The sister who was supposed to be gone. I stood there framed by the doorway, looking at the woman who had left me to die. I looked at Chad, who had turned the color of ash. I looked at the guests who were now staring at me like I was a ghost. They were raising their glasses to toast my funeral. But in reality, they were attending the farewell party for their own life of luxury. I took a step forward, the sound of my heels echoing in the sudden silence. "Hello, sister," I said, my voice calm, clear, and deadly. "I hope you saved me a glass. We have a lot to catch up on." Chad stepped forward, his hands shaking. "Nia, you are awake. We were so worried. The hospital said—" I cut him off with a look that could have frozen hell over. "Save the act, Chad," I said. "The hospital told you exactly what I wanted them to tell you. Just like the ravine told you exactly what you wanted to hear." Bianca found her voice. She stepped forward, trying to regain control of the narrative. Her eyes darted around the room, assessing the damage to her reputation. "Nia. Oh my God," she cried, rushing toward me with her arms open. "You are alive. It is a miracle. Everyone look." My prayers were answered. She tried to hug me. She tried to wrap her arms around me and pull me into her web of lies. I sidestepped her smoothly, letting her stumble into empty space. "Do not touch me," I said. The room gasped. Bianca straightened up, her face flushing red. "Nia, please. Nia, you are confused. You have been through a trauma. Let me take you upstairs. We can call the doctor." "I am not confused, Bianca," I said, raising my voice so every person in that room could hear. "And I do not need a doctor. I need a lawyer." "Oh, wait. I brought one." I gestured to the door. Marcus walked in holding a thick briefcase. Behind him walked two uniformed police officers. The color drained from Bianca's face completely. "What is this?" she hissed, dropping the act. What are you doing? I am crashing the party, I said, smiling. And I hate to be the one to tell you this, but the venue has changed owners. I looked at the crowd. Get out, I said. All of you. Now. The guests did not need to be told twice. They scrambled for the door, sensing the implosion of the Miller dynasty. Within minutes, it was just me, Bianca, Chad Marcus, and the police. The party was over. The execution was about to begin. The silence that descended on the foyer was heavier than the noise of the party had ever been. The last guest had scurried out the door, leaving the front entrance wide open to the biting Chicago wind. The only sound remaining was the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the ragged breathing of my sister. I stood there in the center of the room. I felt like a statue carved from ice. Beside me, Marcus adjusted his glasses and checked his watch. On my other side, Mrs. Higgins stood with her arms crossed, looking at Bianca with the kind of judgment that usually comes from a higher power. The room smelled of stale champagne and expensive perfume, but underneath it all, I could smell the distinct metallic tang of fear. Bianca was the first to move. She took a step back, her heel crunching on the shards of the crystal flute she had dropped. She looked at the police officers standing by the door, then back at me. Her mind was working furiously, trying to calculate a way out of this, trying to spin a narrative that would save her skin. Nia, she started again, her voice shaking but gaining a little more strength. This is a misunderstanding. A terrible misunderstanding. We were told you were in critical condition. We were told you were unresponsive. We were just trying to prepare for the worst. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound that seemed to bounce off the high ceilings. Prepare for the worst, I repeated. Is that what you call a DJ and a catering van? Is that what you call listing the house before the body is even cold? Chad stepped forward, trying to summon some of the bravado he had displayed only moments ago when he was bragging about bulldozers. Now listen here, Nia, he said, pointing a finger at me. You do not know the pressure we have been under. We have been handling your affairs. We have been dealing with the doctors. We have been worried sick. You have no right to barge in here with the police and embarrass us in front of our friends. I looked at his finger, then up at his face. I have every right, Chad, I said softly, because unlike you, I have proof of exactly how worried you were. I turned to Mrs. Higgins. Mrs. Higgins, would you mind telling my brother-in-law exactly what his wife said when she called the hospital? Mrs. Higgins stepped forward. She was wearing her Sunday best, a navy blue dress with a white collar, but she carried the authority of her uniform. She looked directly at Bianca, who shrank back against the mantel. She called on the second day. Mrs. Higgins said, her voice clear and projecting to every corner of the room. She did not ask about your vitals. She did not ask about your pain levels. She asked if you were dead yet. And when I said you were stable, she asked if we could increase the sedation. She said, and I quote, keep her under until I get back. I have paperwork to sort out. Bianca gasped. That is a lie. That woman is lying. I never said that. Mrs. Higgins reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital recorder. In the state of Illinois, Mrs. Higgins said calmly, only one party needs to consent to a recording if there is a reasonable suspicion of a crime. And since I suspected you were plotting to harm your sister, I recorded every single call. She pressed play. Bianca's voice, tinny but unmistakable, filled the room. I do not care if she wakes up. Just keep her quiet. If she talks, she ruins everything. Just give her the maximum dose. I will make it worth your while. The recording stopped. Chad looked at Bianca. For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of the sinking ship he was handcuffed to. You recorded that, Chad whispered. I did, Mrs. Higgins said. And I gave a copy to the police. Bianca's face twisted. She looked from Mrs. Higgins to me, her mask of the grieving sister finally cracking completely to reveal the monster underneath. You ungrateful little witch, she spat at me. After everything I did for you, I let you live here. I let you be part of this family. And this is how you repay me, by spying on me, by humiliated me. You did not let me live here, Bianca, I said, taking a step closer. I own this house. I paid the property taxes while you were buying purses. I fixed the roof while you were vacationing in the Hamptons. And as for being part of this family, you made it very clear in the ravine that I was not family. I was just a loose end. I do not know what you are talking about, Bianca shrieked. You are delusional. You hit your head. You are imagining things. Am I? I asked. I nodded to Marcus. My lawyer stepped forward, placing the briefcase on the table where the champagne fountain had been. He snapped the latches open with a loud click. Mr. and Mrs. Miller Marcus said, his voice smooth and professional. My client is not imagining anything. In fact, she has been exceptionally lucid. Lucid enough to file a restraining order against both of you, which the officers here are ready to serve. Restraining order, Chad stammered. But we live here. Not anymore, Marcus said, pulling out a document. You are currently trespassing. This property belongs to the estate of the late Dr. and Mrs. Wilson. As the executor has not yet been appointed due to your interference, Nia Wilson retains the right of residency. You do not. This is ridiculous, Bianca yelled. I am the oldest. I am the executor. Not according to the motion filed with the probate court this morning, Marcus countered. We have petitioned to have you removed as executor due to gross negligence and attempted fraud, and given the evidence we provided, including the recording from Mrs. Higgins and the dashcam footage from the accident, the judge granted an emergency order. Dashcam, Bianca whispered. The word hung in the air. Yes, I said, enjoying the look of absolute horror on her face. You forgot about the dashcam, Bianca. You were so busy running away. You forgot to check if the car was actually dead. It recorded everything. It recorded you grabbing the wheel. It recorded you telling Chad to leave me there. It recorded you planning to sell the house over my dead body. Chad slumped against the wall, his legs giving out. He slid down until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. It is over, he mumbled. It is all over. Shut up, Chad, Bianca screamed, kicking at his leg. It is not over. She is bluffing. That video probably does not even show anything. She is just trying to scare us. I looked at her. She was still fighting. She was like a cornered rat snapping its teeth even as the trap closed around its neck. I am not trying to scare you, Bianca, I said. I am trying to evict you. I walked over to the fireplace and picked up a framed photo of our parents. It was taken on their 30th anniversary. They looked so happy. They had no idea that their legacy would end in a war between their daughters. You have 10 minutes, I said, turning back to them. 10 minutes to pack your personal effects and get off my property. The officers will supervise you. If you are not out in 10 minutes, you will be arrested for trespassing. You cannot do this to me, Bianca cried, tears of rage streaming down her face. I have nowhere to go. We sold the townhouse. We have no money. I know, I said coldly. I saw your bank accounts, remember. I know you are broke. I know you are desperate. And frankly, I do not care. Bianca looked at me, and for a second I saw a flash of the sister I used to know. The sister who used to braid my hair. The sister who used to defend me on the playground. Nia, please, she whispered. We are sisters. Blood is thicker than water. I looked her dead in the eye. Blood is just a liquid, Bianca. And right now it is staining my carpet. Get out! The officers stepped forward. One of them motioned for Chad to stand up. Let's go, folks, the officer said. You heard the lady. 10 minutes. Bianca let out a scream of frustration and stormed up the stairs, her heels hammering against the wood. Chad pulled himself up and followed her, looking like a man marching to the gallows. I stood in the foyer watching them go. Mrs. Higgins put a hand on my shoulder. You did good, honey, she said softly. I let out a breath I did not know I had been holding. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But I could not rest yet. This was just the first battle. Marcus closed his briefcase. Step 1 is complete, he said. They are out of the house, but you know they will not give up. They still think they can sell the house to pay off the debt. They do not know about the loan purchase yet. I know I said watching the police officers follow them up the stairs. They think this is just a property dispute. They think if they can get a lawyer and fight the restraining order, they can still win. I walked over to the window and looked out at the street. The catering van was driving away. The party was truly over. Let them think that, I said. Let them spend their last few dollars on a lawyer. Let them scramble. I turned back to Marcus. When does the foreclosure notice drop? 5 days, he said. At midnight. Perfect, I said. Upstairs, I could hear Bianca throwing things. I could hear her screaming at Chad. The sound was music to my ears. I walked into the living room and surveyed the damage. Red wine stains on the rug, broken glass on the hearth, cigarette ash on the floor. They had treated my home like a frat house. They had treated my life like a disposable commodity. I picked up a broom from the corner where the cleaning crew had left it. I started to sweep up the glass. One shard at a time. This was my house, this was my life, and I was taking it back. Bianca came down the stairs 10 minutes later dragging 2 suitcases. She was not wearing the silk dress anymore. She was wearing jeans and a sweater. She looked smaller, older. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at me. "You will regret this, Nia," she said, her voice low and venomous. "You think you have won, but you have no idea who you are messing with. Chad has friends, powerful friends. You are going to wish you had died in that car." I leaned on the broom and smiled. "Is that a threat, Bianca? Because I think the officers would love to add intimidation of a witness to the police report." She glared at me one last time, then turned and walked out the door. Chad followed her, not daring to look at me. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind them. I locked it. Then I engaged the deadbolt. Then I set the alarm. I was alone in the house. Finally. But the silence was not empty. It was full of possibility. I turned to Mrs. Higgins and Marcus. "Who wants a drink?" I asked. "I think there is a bottle of scotch that Chad didn't manage to finish." Mrs. Higgins smiled. "I think I will take you up on that." We went into the library, my father's sanctuary. I poured 3 glasses of the 25-year-old scotch. "To justice," Marcus said, raising his glass. "To survival," Mrs. Higgins added. "To family," I said, my voice hard, and knowing when to cut them off. We drank. The liquid was warm and smooth. It tasted like victory. But as I sat there in my father's leather chair, I knew the war was not over. Bianca was right about one thing. Chad did have friends. The people he owed money to were not going to be happy that he was homeless and broke, and in 5 days when I dropped the foreclosure bomb, they were going to get even more desperate. I looked at the clock. 4 days, 23 hours, and 40 minutes until midnight. The countdown had begun. The guests did not leave immediately. Human curiosity is a powerful force, and the spectacle unfolding in the Miller family foyer was far more compelling than any reality television show. They lingered in the doorways and crowded the edges of the room, their eyes darting between me and my sister. This was exactly what I wanted. Bianca lived for an audience, so I was going to make sure she died a social death in front of one. Bianca, realizing the guests were still watching, attempted one last desperate pivot. She clasped her hands over her mouth and let out a sob that sounded practiced. "Nia," she cried, her voice thick with fake emotion. "You are confused. You are distraught. I was so worried about you. I called the hospital every single hour. I was terrified I had lost my baby sister." She took a step toward me, her arms outstretched as if to embrace a lost child. I stepped back, my heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. I pulled my phone from my pocket. "You were worried?" I asked, my voice cutting through her performance. "Is that what you call it?" I tapped the screen and connected via Bluetooth to the expensive surround sound system that Chad had installed just last week. "Let's listen to exactly how worried you were." I pressed play. The audio file was crystal clear, amplified by the speakers in every corner of the room. It was not the recording Mrs. Higgins had played for the police earlier. This was a voicemail Bianca had left on the hospital administrator's private line, which I had accessed during my deep dive into the hospital's servers. Bianca's voice boomed through the house, shrill and impatient. "Look, I do not care what the protocol is. Just keep her sedated. If she wakes up and starts talking, she is going to complicate the estate transfer. Keep her under until I get back from Cabo. I am the legal guardian, and I am ordering you to keep her quiet. Do not let her discharge. Do not let her make calls. Just keep her in the bed." The recording ended. The silence that followed was suffocating. I looked at the guests. I saw jaws dropping. I saw the news anchor who had been consoling Bianca moments ago step back, looking at her with undisguised disgust. "You wanted to keep me quiet, Bianca?" I said, smiling coldly. "But you forgot that digital footprints scream louder than words." Bianca's face went from pale to a blotchy red. She stammered, looking around for an ally but finding none. That is edited," she screeched, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She manipulated it. She is a computer genius, everyone knows that. She is trying to frame me." Chad, seeing his wife floundering, decided to resort to the only tool he had left: brute force. "Enough," Chad roared. He stepped forward, his face purple with rage, veins bulging in his neck. He looked like a bull ready to charge. "Turn that off," he shouted, marching toward me. "This is my house. Get out! Get out right now before I throw you out myself." He reached for my arm. Before the police officers could intervene, I stood my ground. I did not flinch. "It is not your house, Chad," I said, my voice calm and steady. I reached into the leather portfolio Marcus was holding and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the deed to the house, but not the old one. This was the updated title search I had pulled that morning. I held it up for him to see. According to the county recorder of deeds, this house belongs to the Nia Wilson Trust. And since I am very much alive and mentally competent, the trust remains under my sole control. You are not the owner, Chad. You are a squatter. Chad stopped, his hand inches from my face. He looked at the paper, then at the police officers who had hands on their holsters ready to drop him if he touched me. "But the will," he sputtered. The will says the assets are divided only after probate is closed," I interrupted. "And probate is not closed. In fact, with the evidence of attempted murder I just filed, your inheritance is currently being frozen pending a criminal investigation." "Attempted murder?" a woman in the back whispered. The words rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Bianca laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "Murder. Oh, please, it was an accident. The car slid. We were lucky to survive. We went to get help." "We went to get help," I repeated slowly, testing the words. "Is that the story you are sticking with?" "Yes," Bianca insisted, regaining some of her arrogance. "We went to find a signal. We were in shock. We thought you were already gone. It was a tragedy, Nia. A terrible accident." I looked at the massive 80-inch television mounted above the fireplace. It was currently displaying a slideshow of photos from Bianca's life. Bianca in Paris. Bianca in Tulum. Bianca looking perfect. "I think it is time we updated the playlist," I said. I swiped on my phone, casting a video file to the screen. The slideshow vanished. In its place, the grainy but high-definition footage from my dashboard camera appeared. The room went deathly silent. On the screen, the timestamp showed the date and time of the crash. The angle was tilted, showing the hood of my car and the trees rushing past as we rolled down the embankment. The sound of metal crunching filled the living room, making several guests flinch. Then the motion stopped. The screen showed the steam rising from the engine and the cracked windshield, and then came the voices. "Is she bad?" Bianca's voice asked from the speakers. "She looks pretty bad," Chad's voice replied. "That dash crushed her leg. She is losing a lot of blood." "Call 911, my own voice rasped from the recording, weak and filled with pain. The guests watched in horror as the video continued. They heard the silence where the call for help should have been, and then they heard the sentence that would seal my sister's fate. If she dies, the trust dissolves. I am the sole beneficiary. A collective gasp went through the room. A woman dropped her wine glass and it shattered, but no one looked down. Every eye was glued to the screen. Think about it, Chad's recorded voice said. If we call for help, she survives. She sues us. But if we leave, nature takes its course. Let's go. The video showed the backs of Bianca and Chad scrambling up the hill, leaving the frame, leaving me to die. I paused the video right on the frame where they turned their backs. I turned to face the room. Nature takes its course, I repeated, looking at Chad. That is what you said. Right. Chad was trembling so hard he could barely stand. He looked like a man who had just seen his own execution. Bianca was frozen, staring at the screen, her mouth open in a silent scream. The murmurs began. At first it was just a low buzz, but then it grew louder. Monsters, someone whispered. They left her to die, another voice said. I cannot believe it. The socialites and influencers, the people Bianca had spent years trying to impress, began to pull out their phones. But they were not taking selfies. They were recording her. They were recording the woman who had abandoned her sister in a ditch to pay for a Hermes bag. This is what you are, I said, pointing at the screen. You are not victims. You are not grieving family members. You are predators, and you failed. Bianca looked at the guests, her eyes wide with panic. No, she pleaded, holding out her hands. You do not understand. It was the shock. We were not thinking clearly. Stop recording! Please stop recording! She lunged at a woman who was filming her, trying to slap the phone out of her hand. Get away from me, you psycho! The woman yelled, pushing Bianca back. The illusion of the perfect Miller family did not just crack. It shattered into a million jagged pieces. I looked at the police officers. Officers, I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. I believe you have seen enough to enforce that restraining order now, and perhaps add a few charges for the district attorney. The two officers stepped forward, their faces grim. They had seen enough. The video was damning. Chad Miller. Bianca Miller, one of the officers said, pulling out his handcuffs. You are under arrest. For what? Bianca screamed, backing away. This is my house. You cannot arrest me in my own house. For reckless endangerment, leaving the scene of an accident, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The officer listed calmly, grabbing her wrist and spinning her around. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Chad did not fight. He let the officer cuff him, his head hanging low, his eyes fixed on the floor. He knew the game was up. He knew that the people he owed money to would see this on the news within the hour. Prison was probably the safest place for him now. I stood in the center of the room as they were dragged out. Bianca was screaming, cursing my name, calling me a devil. Chad was silent. The guests parted like the Red Sea to let the police pass. They looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. I did not look at them. I walked over to the table where the champagne was still chilling in the silver bucket. I picked up the bottle. I poured myself a glass. I took a sip, letting the bubbles fizz on my tongue. The party is over, I said to the room at large. Please see yourselves out. As the guests shuffled out, whispering and looking back at me, I turned my gaze back to the television screen. The frozen image of my sister walking away from the crash was still there. Goodbye, Bianca, I whispered, raising my glass to the screen. I had stripped them of their reputation. I had stripped them of their freedom. But I was not done yet. They still had a debt to pay. And tomorrow the foreclosure notice would hit. The real punishment was just beginning. Just as the officers were guiding them toward the open doorway, Chad planted his feet. He was a large man, and despite the handcuffs, he managed to jerk his shoulder away from the officer's grip. He turned back to face me, his face twisted in a rictus of pure spite. He knew he was going to jail. He knew his reputation was destroyed. But Chad was the kind of man who would burn the whole world down just to see you cough in the smoke. He started to laugh. It was a wet, gurgling sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. You think you won? He spat, his voice echoing in the empty foyer. You think you are so smart, Nia? You think getting us arrested changes anything? It does not change a damn thing. The officer grabbed his arm again, but Chad shouted over him, desperate to get his final words out. We already won, he screamed, his eyes bulging. The house is gone, Nia. We signed the papers. We mortgaged it to the hilt. $600,000. We spent it all. And you know who holds the note? Apex Capital. They are sharks, Nia. Worse than me. They do not care about your little trust fund or your legal rights. They have a lien on this property, and they're going to foreclose next week. He grinned, showing his teeth stained with wine and cigar smoke. So go ahead. Live here for a few days. But when the sheriff comes to kick you out, remember that I was the one who sold the roof over your head. You are going to be just as homeless as us. Bianca stopped struggling. She looked at her husband, and a flicker of hope ignited in her eyes. It was pathetic, really. She was clinging to the destruction of our childhood home as her last victory. That is right, she shrieked, her voice cracking. We took everything. You get nothing, Nia. Nothing. The bank will take it all. I stood there calmly, holding the file Marcus had given me. I watched them gloat. I watched them try to find joy in their own scorching earth policy. They were willing to lose everything just to ensure I did not keep anything. I walked slowly toward them. The officers paused, sensing that I had one final thing to say. I stopped 3 feet away from Chad. I could smell his fear masking itself as arrogance. You are right, Chad, I said, my voice low and conversational. Apex Capital is a predatory lender. They are ruthless. They charge 40% interest and they foreclose immediately upon default. They are terrifying. Chad's grin widened. See? You are screwed. I opened the leather portfolio. I pulled out the thick document with the red stamp on the top. But you are wrong about one thing, Chad. Apex Capital does not hold the note anymore. Chad frowned. What are you talking about? I held the document up. I made sure the lighting from the chandelier hit the red stamp perfectly. Distressed assets are a commodity, I explained, sounding like the professor I sometimes wished I had become. And when a loan is this toxic, companies like Apex are usually happy to sell it for quick cash, especially if the buyer pays a premium. I pointed to the line at the bottom of the page. Read it, Chad. He squinted. The arrogance started to drain from his face, replaced by confusion. Assigned to Phoenix Holdings LLC, he read. He looked up at me. Who is Phoenix Holdings? I smiled. It was the smile of a wolf who had just cornered the rabbit. I whispered. The color did not just drain from his face, it vanished. He looked like a corpse. You? He gasped. Me? I confirmed. I bought your debt this morning, Chad. I paid Apex Capital $700,000 of my own money to acquire the loan you took out. I own the note. I own the mortgage. And most importantly, I own the default clause. I turned the page to the section I had highlighted in yellow. According to the terms you signed, which, by the way, is another count of fraud since you forged my signature, the full amount is due in 5 days. But since you have just been arrested for a felony, and since the collateral is now part of a criminal investigation, I am exercising the acceleration clause. I snapped the folder shut. The sound was like a gunshot. The entire loan is due now, Chad, immediately. And since I know for a fact you do not have $600,000 because you spent it all on illegal gambling debts, I am initiating immediate foreclosure proceedings to recover my losses. Chad's knees actually buckled. The officer had to hold him up. No, he whispered. No, you cannot. I can, I said. And I will. I am taking the house, Chad, not as your sister-in-law but as your creditor. And since the house is worth $3 million and the debt is only $600,000, I will keep the change as damages for the emotional distress you caused me. I took a step closer, getting right in his face. You are not just going to prison, Chad. You are going to prison penniless. And when you get out, if you get out, you will still owe me legal fees. I will garnish every paycheck you ever earn. I will haunt your financial life until the day you die. Chad looked at me, and then he looked at Bianca. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had lost. He had lost the money. He had lost the house. He had lost his freedom. And he was terrified. Suddenly, the tough guy act evaporated. The arrogance disappeared. All that was left was a coward. He threw himself down. The handcuffs made it awkward, and he landed hard on his knees, dragging the police officer down a few inches with him. Nia, he sobbed, tears instantly streaming down his face. Nia, please, you cannot do this. I am family. I looked down at him with zero sympathy. Family, I repeated. You left me in a ditch, Chad. It was her, he screamed, pointing his chin at Bianca. It was all her idea. I wanted to call for help, Nia, I swear. She stopped me. She said we needed the money. She said she hated you. She said you were always the favorite and she wanted you gone. I just went along with it because I was scared of her. Bianca let out a sound that was half scream, half gasp. You lying snake, she yelled, lunging at him. You coward. It was your gambling debt, Chad. You owed the mob. You told me they were going to break your legs if we did not get the money. You begged me to forge the signature. She looked at me, desperation clawing at her throat. Nia, he is lying. He is a gambling addict. He owes $500,000 to the cartel. That is why we did it. I was trying to save him. I did not want him to die. Please, Nia, you have to believe me. I am your sister. I watched them turn on each other. It was fascinating. 5 minutes ago, they were a united front of evil. Now that the money was gone and the consequences were real, they were tearing each other apart like rats in a barrel. Stop it, I said, my voice cutting through their screaming match. They both fell silent, looking up at me, hoping for mercy. I do not care whose idea it was, I said. You both got in the car. You both walked away. And you both spent the money. I looked at Chad. And Chad, I said, leaning down slightly. If you owe the mob $500,000 and you just lost their only hope of repayment, I suggest you ask the judge for solitary confinement, because you are going to be safer inside than you are out here. Chad let out a low moan of pure terror. He knew I was right. I had just signed his death warrant without lifting a finger. I straightened up and nodded to the officers. Get them out of my sight. Nia, please, Bianca wailed as the officer dragged her backward. Nia, I am sorry. I will do anything. I will sign whatever you want. Do not let them take me. I cannot go to jail, too. I am not built for jail. Nia! Her screams faded as they were dragged down the front steps and stuffed into the back of the waiting squad cars. I stood in the doorway watching the flashing blue and red lights bounce off the trees in the front yard. The neighbors had come out onto their porches. They were watching the downfall of the Miller family in real time. I did not hide. I stood there in my red suit holding the file that had destroyed them. Marcus walked up behind me. That was brutal, he said quietly. It was necessary, I replied. He looked at the file in my hand. So you really own the debt? I nodded. Every cent. Technically, he said, adjusting his glasses. Since you are the lender and the borrower is the trust you control, you basically owe the money to yourself. Exactly, I said. I will foreclose on myself. I will wipe the title clean. The house will be fully mine, free and clear of any claims from them or their creditors. It is the perfect wash. Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. You are terrifying, Nia. Remind me never to get on your bad side. I turned and walked back into the foyer. The house was quiet now. The music was gone. The screaming was gone. The only sound was the wind outside. I looked around at the space. It felt different. For the last 10 days it had been a crime scene, a bargaining chip, a source of pain. But now as I stood there, It felt like a home again. My home. I walked over to the table where Bianca had left her phone in the chaos. It was still unlocked. I picked it up. I saw the notifications piling up, messages from friends asking what was happening, comments on her social media asking why the police were there. I opened her Instagram. I took a photo of the empty foyer with the police lights visible through the open door. I posted it to her story with a simple caption, "Game over." Then I dropped the phone into the trash can. I turned to Mrs. Higgins, who was finishing her scotch by the fireplace. "Are you hungry?" I asked. She smiled. "Starving. I think there is a pizza place that delivers this late," I said. "And then tomorrow, we are going to change the locks again. And maybe burn some sage. This place has some bad energy." I sat down on the sofa and propped my injured leg up on the coffee table. The pain was still there, but it was duller now. It was a healing pain. I had won. But as I looked at the spot on the rug where Chad had been kneeling begging for his life, I realized something. The revenge was sweet, but the freedom was sweeter. I was no longer the little sister. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was the owner. And I was just getting started. The officers did not hesitate. The evidence was not just overwhelming, it was absolute. For the last 10 days, while I sat in a cheap motel room tracking digital footprints, Bianca and Chad had been leaving a trail of breadcrumbs so wide a blind man could follow it. They thought they were invisible because they were arrogant. But arrogance is the most expensive luxury in the world, and the bill had just come due. One of the officers stepped forward, pulling a second pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metallic click as he tested the locking mechanism seemed to echo off the marble floors of the foyer. It was a sound that signaled the end of the Miller dynasty. "Chad Miller," the officer said, his voice flat and practiced. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, forgery, and reckless endangerment. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Chad looked at the officer. Then he looked at me. His face was a mask of sheer disbelief. He tried to pull away, but the officer was stronger, and with a swift, practiced motion, he spun Chad around and slammed him against the wall. "Hey, watch the suit," Chad yelled instinctively, worried about his appearance even as his life fell apart. "This is Italian silk. You cannot do this. Do you know who I am?" "We know exactly who you are, Mr. Miller," the officer replied, tightening the cuffs until Chad winced. "You are the guy who left his sister-in-law in a ditch and then tried to sell her house. Now stand still." Bianca was next. She was backing away slowly, shaking her head, her eyes wide and unseeing. She bumped into the side table, knocking over a vase of white lilies. The vase shattered and water pooled on the floor, soaking into the hem of her jeans. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. This is a mistake. I am the victim here. My husband. He forced me. I did not want to leave her. He made me drive away. I watched her throw her husband under the bus without a second of hesitation. It was the final confirmation that there was no love in this marriage, only mutual parasitism." The second officer approached her. "Ma'am, put your hands behind your back." "Do not touch me," Bianca shrieked. Her voice was unrecognizable, a guttural sound of pure panic. "I want my lawyer. I want my parents. Mom, Dad, help me." She was screaming for ghosts. She was calling out for the very people whose legacy she had tried to pawn off to a predatory lender. It was a grotesque display of regression. The sophisticated influencer was gone, replaced by a terrified child who realized the adults were not coming to save her. As the officer cuffed her, she began to thrash. Her hair, which had been perfectly styled, fell across her face in messy clumps. Her mascara began to run, creating dark streaks down her cheeks that looked like black tears. "Nia," she screamed, turning her head to look at me. "Nia, tell them to stop. I am your sister. You cannot let them take me to jail. I will die in there. Nia, please." I stood perfectly still. I did not step forward. I did not look away. I just watched. I remembered the cold wind in the ravine. I remembered the taste of blood in my mouth. I remembered begging them to call 911 and hearing them discuss my death as a business transaction. I wondered if Bianca had thought about me dying in there. I wondered if she had cared. I walked over to the table where Marcus had laid out the legal files. I picked up a specific blue folder. It was thick, heavy with the weight of their crimes. Officer, I said, my voice calm, cutting through Bianca's hysterics. The lead officer looked over at me. In addition to the charges you mentioned, this file contains the forensic accounting report regarding the forged loan documents. It includes time-stamped IP logs proving the application was submitted from their home network. It also contains the bank records showing the transfer of funds to an offshore gambling account registered to Chad Miller. I handed the file to him. It is all there, I said. 18 counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. Chad twisted his head around his face, purple with rage. You set us up, he roared. You set us up, you little witch. You waited. You watched us. You are sick. I am thorough, Chad, I corrected him. There is a difference. The officers began to march them toward the door. The physical reality of it was jarring. These were people who had walked through life thinking the rules did not apply to them. They thought consequences were for poor people. They thought family was a shield they could hide behind while they held a dagger. As they passed me, Chad lunged, trying to get one last word in, but the officer jerked him back. This is not over, Chad spat. My friends, the people I owe, they will come for you. I looked him in the eye. Let them come, I said. I bought your debt, Chad. That means I am the only one you owe now. The mob got their money from the loan you took out. You are clear with them, but you are in the hole with me. And unlike the mob, I do not break legs. I garnish wages, I seize assets, and I have the law on my side. So enjoy prison. It is the only rent-free living you are ever going to get. He slumped, then defeated by the logic. He realized I had closed every loop. There was no boogeyman coming to get me. I was the boogeyman. Bianca was sobbing uncontrollably now. Her legs gave out, and the officer had to practically drag her. Her heels scraped against the floor, leaving black scuff marks on the marble. Dad, she wailed. Why are you letting her do this? I felt a pang of sadness then. Not for her, but for the memory of what we could have been. If she had just been a decent person. If she had just asked for help instead of trying to kill me. We could have been standing here together, but she made her choice. She chose the money. She chose the lie. I walked to the open door and watched as they were led down the front steps. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers illuminated the neighborhood. People were standing on their lawns filming with their phones. Bianca Miller, the social media star, was finally getting the viral moment she had always wanted, just not the one she expected. They were shoved into the back of separate patrol cars. The heavy doors slammed shut, sealing them in. I saw Bianca press her face against the glass. She looked small, distorted, a ghost in a cage. Marcus stepped up beside me. Are you okay? He asked quietly. I took a deep breath, inhaling the cold night air. It smelled of autumn leaves and impending rain. It did not smell of gasoline anymore. I am fine, I said. I did not smile. There was no joy in this. This was not a celebration. It was an amputation. I had cut off a limb that was gangrenous to save the rest of the body. It was necessary, but it still left a scar. The engines of the police cars roared to life. One by one they pulled away from the curb, their sirens chirping briefly as they navigated through the narrow street. I watched the taillights fade into the distance until they were just red dots in the dark. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. Officer, I called out to the remaining policeman who was taking statements from the neighbors. Yes, Ms. Wilson, he asked, walking over. Please make sure the report notes that the alarm system was active and functioning, I said. I wanted on record that there was no forced entry. They used a code I am deleting tonight. Understood, ma'am, he said, making a note. I turned back to the house. My house. The front door was wide open. The foyer was a mess, but the structure was sound. The foundation was strong. I walked back inside and closed the door. I turned the deadbolt. The solid thud of the metal sliding into place felt like a period at the end of a long, terrible sentence. I looked at Mrs. Higgins, who was still standing by the fireplace holding her glass of scotch. She raised it in a silent toast. "They are gone," she said. "They are gone," I repeated, and for the first time in 10 days I truly believed it. The silence in the house was not heavy anymore. It was peaceful, it was mine. I walked over to the wall where the security panel was mounted. I punched in a series of numbers. System armed. The robotic voice confirmed my safety. I turned off the foyer lights, leaving us in the warm glow of the library lamps. "Come on, Mrs. Higgins," I said. "Let's order that pizza. I have a lot of paperwork to do tomorrow. I have to foreclose on a property and I need to find a good contractor to fix the scuff marks on the floor." As I walked toward the kitchen, I felt lighter. The burden of being the scapegoat, the burden of being the victim, it had all been driven away in the back of a police car. I was Nia Wilson, forensic accountant, homeowner, survivor, and I was finally free. The trial was swift. When you have high-definition video evidence of the defendants abandoning a victim and audio recordings of them conspiring to commit fraud, there is very little a defense attorney can do. I sat in the front row every single day. I wore my best suits. I kept my head high. I watched as Bianca tried to turn on the waterworks for the jury, but her performance fell flat. They had seen the video. They had seen the face of a woman who chose money over her own sister's life. The judge was not lenient. He called their actions morally repugnant and a gross violation of the most basic human trust. Bianca and Chad were sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for wire fraud conspiracy and reckless endangerment. I remember the moment the gavel came down. Bianca didn't scream this time. She just looked at me. Her eyes were hollow. She looked stripped of everything: her vanity, her pretension, her false sense of superiority. In that moment, she wasn't the golden child anymore. She was just a number in the system. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I just felt a heavy weight lifting off my shoulders, a weight I hadn't realized I had been carrying my entire life. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright Chicago sunlight. The reporters were there, of course. They shouted questions, asking for a statement. I didn't stop. I didn't need the attention. I had told my story in the courtroom, and that was enough. A few months later, I went back to the house in Hyde Park one last time. It was empty now. The furniture had been auctioned off, the proceeds going to pay off the legitimate debts my parents had left behind. The rooms echoed with my footsteps. I walked into the library where my father used to read. I stood in the kitchen where my mother used to bake. I tried to find the ghosts of the happy family we used to be, but all I could see were the shadows of the betrayal that had happened here. I realized then that a house is not a home. A home is a feeling of safety, and I would never feel safe here again. This place was a monument to a past that was dead. Keeping it would be like carrying a tombstone on my back. I listed it the next day. I sold it to a young family with 3 kids and a golden retriever. When I handed over the keys, the father shook my hand and promised to take care of the rose bushes. I drove away and didn't look back. I didn't keep the money from the sale. It felt tainted, like blood money. Instead, I used every cent to establish the Phoenix Fund. We provide legal and financial assistance to victims of vehicular accidents who have been abandoned or exploited by their families. We help them fight back. We help them rise from the ashes just like I did. Mrs. Higgins is on the board of directors. We meet for lunch every Tuesday. She tells me about her grandkids, and I tell her about the people we've helped. She isn't just a nurse to me anymore. She is the mother figure I lost, the moral compass that pointed true north when my own world was spinning out of control. Marcus is still my lawyer, though now he mostly handles the nonprofit's contracts. He jokes that I'm the only client who ever made him work harder than he wanted to, but I know he respects the hustle. Back in my penthouse, looking out over the city lights, I often think about the concept of family. We are taught from a young age that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water, that you stick by your kin no matter what. But that is a dangerous lie. Biology is just biology. It's a random roll of the genetic dice. It doesn't guarantee love, it doesn't guarantee loyalty, and it certainly doesn't give anyone the right to abuse you, exploit you, or leave you for dead. Real family isn't about whose DNA you share. It's about who shows up when you are broken. It's about who holds your hand in the hospital room. It's about the people who stand beside you when the rest of the world walks away. Bianca and Chad taught me a painful lesson, but it was a valuable one. They taught me that my worth is not defined by how useful I am to others. They taught me that silence is not a virtue when it allows others to hurt you, and most importantly, they taught me that the person I need to rely on the most is myself. I am not the same woman who got into that car 2 weeks ago. That Nia was quiet. That Nia was a pleaser. That Nia thought if she just worked hard enough and stayed out of the way, she would be loved. That Nia died in the ravine. The woman who climbed out is different. I am harder now, yes. My edges are sharper. I don't forgive as easily. But I am also freer. I live my life on my own terms. I surround myself with people who respect me, not people who tolerate me. Sometimes I get letters from Bianca. They are sent from the Federal Correctional Facility. I never open them. I put them directly into the shredder. I don't need to hear her apologies. I don't need to hear her excuses. Her chapter in my book is closed. I have a new life now. A life filled with purpose. A life where I dictate the terms. I took a sip of my wine and looked at the reflection in the glass. I saw a survivor staring back. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it is this: do not let anyone make you feel small. Do not let anyone tell you that you owe them your life just because you share a last name. And if they push you down, if they leave you in the dark, do not just lie there and wait for the end. Get up. Find your way out. And when you come back, make sure you are so strong, so successful, and so undeniable that they regret the day they ever underestimated you. Revenge is not about hurting them. It is about outgrowing them. It is about succeeding in spite of them. It is about looking at the people who wanted to bury you and saying, I am still here. I set the wine glass down on the table. The city of Chicago twinkled below me, a million lights in the darkness. Somewhere out there, there were other Bias, other Chads thinking they could get away with it. And somewhere, there were other Nias waking up, realizing their power. I looked straight into the camera lens. I let a small, knowing smile play on my lips. I hope you enjoyed the story. I hope it gave you the courage to fight your own battles. And remember, never make a forensic accountant angry. We know where the bodies are buried, and more importantly, we know exactly how much the funeral cost. Thanks for watching.